let everyone introduce themselves.
Brigitte Navius.
I'm Chris Morphus.
And I'm Deb Carr.
So we're really excited to be here and to get our presentation done nice and early while everyone's feeling fresh. So the way we want to tackle this is talk a little bit about high-level vision to start with. And I'm going to cover a lot of that, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris. And Chris is going to talk about what we're doing in the Glade and what we're doing around water management, which I think all of us are aware is a little bit of an issue with this site. And then we're going to turn it over to Brigitte, who has amazing plant experience. And then Deb is going to wrap us up with talking about budget and then talk about other parts of the site as we look at what our plan is. So the first thing I want you to do for a minute is go ahead and put everything down and close your eyes. Okay, I want you to take a nice deep breath in slowly. Okay, now let it out. So you can go ahead and open your eyes. So when we talk about Waldorf, there's this idea of the in-breath and the out-breath. So when we were first looking at our vision for what this space would be, the outdoor space would be, it was that it would reflect and enhance the out-breath, that letting go, that relaxing, that it's a healthy and diverse environment, and it's a place that kids can contemplate and explore. This is educational, but it's educational in a Waldorf sense. And that they're exploring not just educationally, but socially and emotionally. So really when we thought about what is the vision, the big picture vision, that's what we were looking for. So we're talking about stakeholders. Who's using this space? Well, kids, first off, parents, and neighbors. And that was something that really came up when we were listening to what our client wanted, was that this is primarily an educational space, primarily a space for kids, but we want to be making sure to think about how do we engage with the community, how do we engage with one another in this environment. Also, we were looking at, as another major factor, is that this is a very heavily used environment, right? We look at it, we know kids are out there constantly, we know on weekends we've got folks passing through, using these trails. So any design that we come up with has to take into account that even though we might be able to mitigate some of that use, that it's always going to be a heavy use environment from what we know. And then there's this maintenance issue, is that, yeah, we may be looking at instituting some ideas for how we're going to change on this, but that as we're looking at how to maintain this space, that we can look to the kids themselves to do some of that maintenance within an educationally appropriate setting. But generally speaking, we want a fairly low maintenance environment that fits with kind of how Waldorf thinks about natural spaces. And we don't want to saddle what is essentially an educational organization with a really major high use, high maintenance design idea. So those are some key things that we were thinking about when we were thinking about use. I want to make a few points now and shift over to the environment. What were some key aspects of the environment that we wanted to take into consideration? We're in the Georgia Piedmont. We're in this really neat kind of sloping environment. We've got a lot of rainfall coming in. So on a roof, that's for a 1-inch rainfall, that's about 622 gallons that come down for 1,000 square feet. So we have a lot of rainfall, and we have this very sloping area. It actually slopes down. If this is our map, I'll just mention this. This is where we are right here. This is Kirk Road. It all slopes down into this glade area and goes this way. So we have a lot of water to contend with, but we also have this great tree cover, which is a really valuable thing for kids being here. It helps mitigate cold weather. It also helps mitigate hot weather. And as part of thinking about what's going on in the environment with water, really cool thing about trees is they're absorbing a lot of that water, and they're also even just changing how it falls on the ground, because they're even absorbing it in the leaves and helping it come down a lot softer. So that's a really great thing about this space. We don't have really many places where we have a lot of direct sunlight that gets too hot in the summer, and those trees are really helping us. There are a lot of invasives on this site, which I know our folks here at Waldorf really want to be looking at how do you transition over to natives and things that are more natural, so it fosters a greater wildlife diversity and really works more with the landscape of the Georgia Piedmont. Looking at use, talking about how we're using the site. So on our main map here, when we're up here in these spaces, we really saw a huge amount of the use is going on up here. We have these playgrounds that we have. They're very, very heavily used. And then as you get farther out, you'll see less use. Now that really makes a lot of sense, frankly, when we're looking at what a lot of kids being on the site. You get this far out, you don't have access to bathrooms, you don't have access to running water. So this might not be the best place to have a daily playground event for second graders. So we really tried to keep that in mind with our design of letting some of these far areas be areas that are left pretty wild. And over in the garden, you'll hear a little bit about one idea that we had. It's still fairly far from some of our main buildings, but even so, want to kind of look at how we can improve some of those facilities right there in the garden. Let's see. And then switching over to some of our ideas. So our key area was the Glade. Our key area that we were looking at to design towards was this area right down here. It's at the bottom of the bowl. And when we were designing, we had some key principles in mind. So catching and storing energy, that's going to be a big one. I think we're going to hear that in a lot of our presentations today, because water is something that we're all going to be thinking about. Also working with nature and not against it. So that can be as simple as how do we use gravity to help us find solutions? How do we find different materials that are really here on site and easy to access and low cost to access, come up with solutions? And how do we have redundant solutions so that we're not relying on a single thing to single solution to fix everything? So moving over to our design a little bit more and patterns. So when we talked about our patterns for what we're going to do, you'll see a few different patterns that show up. Number one, we really looked at this question of how do we use what's here with us? How do we use what nature has given us? There's a lot of wood on this site, a ton of wood. So logs you're going to see is a big design feature for us. Also, we took that and made it a little bit more formal with repeating a gate pattern that you'll see. There's a really lovely gate out in the corner that is a really nice pattern, but it's still that use of wood and that importance of use of wood. We look at consistent plantings throughout the site. So when we talk a little bit more, when Brigitte talks about our planting plan, you'll see that we're looking at using a lot of the same ideas throughout the site. And then the Waldorf logo is very distinctive. It's a very unique logo. How do we make that much more repetitive within this area to really enhance Waldorf? And so one area is we're going to point to a few things here. You'll see, let's see, right here, we have some various signage that we were looking at doing. We were looking at doing signage like this that would be using a Waldorf-shaped logo sign. As well, we have a patio that you'll hear a little bit more, looking at having various elements within our entire design that are going to have that same pattern. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Chris, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the Glade itself and water management.
All right. So the Glade is a broad, flat playground. It's used primarily as a supervised play area for a lot of the students here, and also an educational space for more formal educational activities. It's a community gathering space for various events that take place with students and local residents. And it's also a place for parents to watch their kids at play. As it is right now, here's our plan of the Waldorf School. This is the building that we're in right here. And the Glade is kind of down here at the bottom of this slope. Right now it is this area that I'm circling with my finger right here. And if the school and the property is sort of on the slope of a bowl, the Glade's kind of sitting right here towards the bottom. And so it receives a lot of water and cooling from upslope. And that's kind of one of the first things we noticed about it is there's a big soggy spot in the middle of it that makes that impairs its use in some ways for running around and playing games. A large portion of the year, it's not a puddle exactly, but it's really muddy right in the center. So that's one of the first major problems that we noticed. It also has to withstand pretty heavy use, a lot of running and playing. So that's sort of a design constraint. It needs to be open, and it needs to be resilient. One other thing that we noticed about it is that the Glade itself and a lot of the rest of the campus, as you walk around, it has a very naturalistic feel to it. We felt that wayfinding and just the sense of place could be enhanced by adding features that sort of help you transition from space to space, because there's a number of different open spaces throughout the campus. So we're looking at ways to create sort of a sense of entry and exit as you go into various parts of it. And we'll focus on doing that with the Glade. But first I want to talk about the water issue, because that's sort of an overarching problem that guided our design and our response to how we might enhance the use of the place. So the Glade's right here at the bottom of the bowl. The water is pooling right in the middle of it. And the reason that it was placed there, it makes sense to have a big, flat, open play area there, because it's the flattest part of the site, since it's getting towards the toe of that slope. The landscape starts to flatten out. But it's sort of a paradox, because that's where the water naturally wants to be. And to some extent, that's where nature is going to put the water. But we also think that a large part of that water is settling there in larger volumes than might naturally occur because of development and hardscape all around the top of this slope. We've got school buildings and the road up here, and neighboring buildings that stretch all out in this direction. So to start to mitigate the volume of water that settles in the middle of the Glade, we thought we might start higher up and address water runoff that's coming from Kirk Road and these school buildings. So what we're proposing is a series of swales and other basins to catch water as it runs down the slope before it even enters the Glade. For example, here in this building that we're in today, we've already seen and helped to implement some design interventions that help to reduce the runoff that are coming out, that this rooftop is generating. We have rain barrels on numerous corners of the building now. Those overflow into swales in the front yard. Runoff down the driveway is being captured by a swale at the end of the driveway now. So we were looking at ways to continue to implement those sorts of interventions, especially with looking at this building over here, which doesn't have as many swales and rain barrels in place yet to address its runoff. So we thought we'd start with the road. Currently there's a driveway that leads to this building right here. And that driveway in some ways acts as a funnel, just sending water not just from the driveway but also from the road. It hops the curb, goes down the driveway towards the building, and eventually ends up cutting a path all the way down here. And you can actually follow the path of this. It's been kind of carved out by this water runoff. You can follow it all the way down to the Glade. So we walked that path. We saw where parts of the landscape have been scoured, eroded, and otherwise shaped by this flow of water. And we thought, well, maybe the first thing we can do is change the driveway. It could be replaced with permeable pavers, or we thought, what about making sort of like a U-shaped drop-off, still have a path to the front door, and that drop-off could be lined with swales so that runoff from the driveway and the road are now entering swales in the front yard before they make it down in this area. If you go down a little further, we have a basin, a rain garden, against the back fence of this playground. And this is already a spot where you see some water pooling. You can tell the water gets pushed up there against the fence. There's a lot of debris against the fence that is indicative of where the water's been eroding and pushing. So it would be a good spot to create a basin to let water settle and infiltrate into the ground. If you come down a little bit further into this lower playground, there is a small eroded gully that runs right down this west side of the playground. So what we were thinking there is to put in a big swale that diverts a lot of that water off into the woods over here, where it can likewise be spread out, infiltrated further, and progressing further, fish scale swales down at the bottom of this playground. And these would be a way to kind of add swales amongst the already mature trees that are in that area, because we don't want to cut down any trees just to dig swales. So if you break up the swales, make them fish scaled so that they kind of overlap in a non-continuous kind of way, that helps you fit them in amongst the trees that are already there. And so our thinking for this was that all of these interventions are going to contribute to mitigating the water pooling that happens in the glade. But we were thinking about this in terms of phasing and implementation. You want to start at the top, put in your swales up here, put in your rain barrels, rain garden, and progress your way down the slope. And each time you do this, you stop and wait and see what the effect is. And finally, if we've gone through and placed these swales in the woods right above the glade, and we're still seeing a lot of pooling, our hope is that at some point this pooling is going to be mitigated and lessened. But if it's still a big problem, even after these interventions have taken place, then we start to think that, maybe we should be working with nature, not against it, and this is just where the water is going to be naturally. So how about we move the glade a little bit? Because water's just going to settle here, and it's going to keep settling here. So our thought was to just pivot the glade. Currently, it's right here. And if you rotate it about 90 degrees from this point right here, this way it kind of it sticks out into an area that's currently wooded. We walked through that area with a cell phone GPS and kind of traced a path that allowed us to skirt all of the really big mature trees that are down there. So this area, it's a little bit kidney bean shaped because we want to avoid chopping down any huge trees. But it will allow us to expand the glade into the woods that are here right now. And it would eliminate most of the existing pooling area. It would take the glade out of that area. So that would involve some clearing of some trees and some regrading. But overall, we wanted to take a really delicate approach and minimize our impact on the existing natural environment that's already there. So if we reorient the glade over in this direction, that leaves about half of the existing glade that is open space, but we're no longer really wanting to use it because of the aforementioned issues. So we thought, why not try to restore it as a really ecologically diverse meadow planting. We're focusing on early successional plants, a lot of wildflowers, and we want really great diverse vegetation. We included some shrubs, but we were thinking sort of a low growth or a low growing, low to the ground meadow It could be a visual feature, a really beautiful space, as well as a place that is home to a large variety of plants. So to that end, this is the blown up, the blow up of this area here. It cuts off about this half of the glade, but here you see our fish scale swales that are in the woods here. Part of our new glade, and this area down here is the section of the old glade that is now vacant. We've divided it up into 5 microclimates that reflect the shade and moisture conditions of that area, and we've come up with 5 different plant assemblages that would respond to those microclimates. We would seed wildflowers and plant some small plants in that area, and Brigitte will tell you guys more about that in a moment. But there are a few other features that go with our design here. We would have a boardwalk running through the moist area, another path running up the side of the meadow here, and that would allow people to access this area, walk through it, and connect it to these existing trails through the woods here. We were looking at, currently there's a path that goes right down this way and enters the glade right here. This also acts as sort of a funnel for water that goes directly down the contour lines, and so you can look at that and see where water's been eroding and pushing into the glade. So we thought, why not reroute that path and walk through the playground here and enter at this newly created end right here. That way we now have 2 main entrances. We have this new entrance over here, an existing entrance right here, and then this is the pathway that goes over to the garden. So entrance on either side of the glade, and in order to create sort of a sense of entry and a threshold, Mary talked about taking that Waldorf logo and repeating it throughout the site to add some patterning and create sort of a symbol that gets repeated all throughout to create sort of a sense of cohesion. So we were thinking we could take we could create sort of a threshold patio made of flagstone interplanted with some hardy resilient grass and lined landscape timbers in the shape of this Waldorf puzzle piece logo. That would be on the ground, creating a threshold as you enter the glade in both of these places. And that patio would be flanked by wooden gates, sort of like the ones that you see when you enter the property right here, from the church over here. As you come in, there's some really interesting, neat gates that I'm sure most of you have noticed. And so repeating those design elements around the site, we think would help to create more of a sense of cohesion throughout the space. A couple of other kind of small design features that we wanted to include. Currently, there's a storage shed right here near the top of the glade. I believe it was originally built to be a greenhouse, but it's in the middle of a cluster of trees, and the roof is caved in. So it's kind of ramshackle, not functioning as a greenhouse. There are a few things stored in it, but even for storage, it's not adequate for a lot of purposes because it barely has a roof. So that could stand to be restored, and we thought that maybe the best place for it would actually be over here in the garden. So we could pick it up, move it, place it over in the garden where it could be used as a greenhouse. Seating. Currently we have, that image didn't make it onto our board here, but currently there's a seating area at the base of the glade, right over here. It's kind of a hodgepodge of sawhorses, a couple of benches, and that seating area looks like it could stand to be restored as well. Some of the seats are on the verge of falling over, actually. So we were looking at how we might incorporate new seating into our Glade, so that kids who've been running around can take a break. Teachers that are out there with them have a place to sit and supervise, and parents too. And so we were looking at all sorts of cool things you can do with logs, because there's an abundance of logs around the site. Reusing those resources, this is a good way to keep resources on site